The Veil of Ignorance, A Philosophical Journey Through Justice and Fairness. Introduction. The origins of the veil of ignorance. In the vast expanse of moral and political philosophy, few thought experiments are as striking and influential as the veil of ignorance. This concept, developed by the American philosopher John Rawls in his 1971 book A Theory of Justice, serves as a powerful tool for envisioning a just society. Rawls, a Harvard professor and one of the most important political philosophers of the 20th century, devised this idea as a means of determining the principles of justice that should govern a fair and equitable society. His work was rooted in the social contract tradition, drawing inspiration from thinkers such as Thomas Hobbes, John Locke, Jean-Jacques Rousseau, and Immanuel Kant. Rawls proposed that in order to establish principles of justice free from personal bias, individuals should imagine themselves in an original position behind a veil of ignorance. This hypothetical veil strips them of all knowledge about their personal characteristics, race, gender, wealth, intelligence, religion, and social status. Without this information, they must choose the fundamental rules of society based on fairness and impartiality. The idea is that because no one knows what position they will hold in the world, they will choose rules that benefit everyone, particularly the least advantaged. Since its introduction, the veil of ignorance has been widely discussed, criticized, and applied across various domains including politics, economics, law, and ethics. It serves as an enduring reminder of the importance of justice and equality in human society. A thought experiment in justice. To understand the veil of ignorance in practice, imagine that you and a group of strangers are tasked with designing a new society from scratch. However, before making any decisions, you must step behind the veil of ignorance. You have no idea whether you will be born into wealth or poverty, into privilege or oppression, as a man or a woman, able-bodied or disabled. Given this uncertainty, what kind of society would you construct? Rawls argues that rational individuals, wanting to ensure their well-being regardless of their eventual place in society, would prioritize principles that guarantee fundamental liberties and economic fairness. He suggests that two principles of justice would emerge. The principle of equal basic liberties. Everyone should have the same fundamental rights, such as freedom of speech, freedom of thought, and political participation. The difference principle. Social and economic inequalities are permissible only if they benefit the least advantaged members of society. Under these principles, people behind the veil of ignorance would not, for instance, design a system that allows extreme wealth disparity, if it means that some people would be condemned to poverty without opportunity. Instead, they would create a society that ensures fairness in opportunity and economic structures that provide for the least well-off. Applications in modern society. The veil of ignorance is not just an abstract thought experiment. It has real-world implications across multiple areas of life. Here are some key ways it applies to modern issues. Economic inequality and welfare policies. Rawls' framework suggests that if people designed economic systems from behind the veil of ignorance, they would likely support policies such as progressive taxation, universal health care, and social safety nets. Since they wouldn't know whether they'd be born into wealth or poverty, they would want to ensure a minimum standard of living for all. Countries with strong social welfare programs, such as Norway and Sweden, often align with Rawlsian principles. In contrast, societies with extreme wealth gaps and weak social protections can be seen as failing the veil of ignorance test, as they leave the least advantaged without adequate support. Criminal justice and legal fairness. The veil of ignorance also has profound implications for criminal justice reform. If one had no knowledge of their racial background or socioeconomic status, they would likely advocate for a legal system that treats all individuals fairly, without bias based on race or class. For example, disparities in sentencing for similar crimes committed by different racial groups highlight a failure to uphold Rawlsian justice. If lawmakers and judges considered policies from behind the veil of ignorance, they would likely support measures to eliminate racial bias, ensure fair trials, and implement equitable sentencing. 3. Gender and social justice. Gender discrimination is another area where the veil of ignorance offers a compelling critique. If one did not know whether they would be born male or female, they would likely advocate for policies that ensure equal pay, parental leave, and protection against workplace harassment. Movements such as the push for gender equality in wages and leadership positions align with Rawlsian principles. The ongoing struggle for reproductive rights and bodily autonomy can also be examined through this lens. If individuals behind the veil of ignorance did not know whether they would be born with the ability to bear children, they would likely support policies that ensure reproductive freedoms. Education and opportunity access to quality education is one of the most significant factors in determining an individual's future opportunities. If people designed educational policies without knowing whether they would be born into privilege or poverty, they would likely support equitable funding for public schools, accessible higher education, and programs that help disadvantaged students succeed. The veil of ignorance would suggest that societies should structure their educational systems to ensure that everyone, regardless of background, has a fair chance at success. This could involve policies such as universal pre-K, free or affordable college tuition, and robust financial aid programs. Global justice and refugee crises. The veil of ignorance extends beyond national borders. If individuals did not know what country they would be born in, they would likely advocate for fair immigration policies, international aid, and efforts to combat global poverty. For instance, the treatment of refugees and asylum seekers can be analyzed through this framework. If policymakers had to create immigration laws without knowing whether they would be a native-born citizen or a refugee fleeing war, they might favor more compassionate and humane policies. Criticisms and limitations, while the veil of ignorance is a powerful tool for thinking about justice. It is not without criticism. Some argue that it is overly idealistic. Real-world decision-making is rarely conducted in a vacuum free of personal biases. Others contend that it does not adequately account for cultural and historical differences in values. Additionally, libertarians often challenge Rawls' emphasis on economic redistribution, arguing that it imposes unjust restrictions on individual freedom and property rights. Nevertheless, despite these criticisms, the veil of ignorance remains one of the most influential ideas in political philosophy. It continues to inspire debates about fairness, justice, and the moral foundations of society. Conclusion: a vision for a just world. The veil of ignorance forces us to step outside of ourselves and consider justice from a universal perspective. In an age of increasing inequality and social division, Rawls' thought experiment remains as relevant as ever. It challenges us to design policies and institutions that do not privilege the powerful, but instead create fair opportunities for all. By adopting the veil of ignorance in our moral and political thinking, we can strive for a world that is not just beneficial to the few, but fair and just for everyone, regardless of the circumstances of their birth. The true test of any society is not how it treats the most privileged, but how it ensures dignity, opportunity, and justice for the least advantaged. Rawls' legacy reminds us that the pursuit of fairness is not an abstract ideal, but a responsibility that we all share.